I'm Kerriann Speranza, and the title of my presentation is The Effects of Massachusetts Decriminalization of Marijuana Law on Use Patterns. Marijuana has been used for centuries in Asia and Africa for its intoxicant properties. It is a product of the hemp plant Cannabis sativa L, a species that is also a useful fiber, an edible seed, an oil, and a medicine. Marijuana smoking began in the United States after World War I and earned recognition as an intoxicant in the 1920s and 1930s. Mexican immigrants and the black populations in southern cities were the first to use marijuana. Exaggerated accounts of violent crimes committed by immigrants and black men reportedly intoxicated by marijuana became popularized. This campaign against marijuana proved very effective, and ultimately these factors played a crucial role in passing federal legislation, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Marijuana is decriminalized in 13 states: Alaska, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Mississippi, Nebraska, Nevada, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, and Oregon, with 11 states decriminalizing in the 1970s. 15 states have medical marijuana laws, and California is considered legalization on the November 2010 ballot. My study assesses the effects of the decriminalization of marijuana law on users. The principal foundation of our criminal laws is utilitarian theory. According to utilitarian theorists such as Jeremy Bentham, the primary purpose of criminal law is to deter bad or harmful behavior. Legislators enact laws to deter unlawful behavior. Thus, it is presumed that once a law is no longer in effect, then the behavior that law sought to prohibit or deter will increase. So once the marijuana decriminalization law was passed, use should have increased. But the proponents of marijuana decriminalization applied Bentham's cases unmet for punishment, arguing that marijuana use is one of those cases in which the punishment is ineffective, needless, groundless, and unprofitable. For these behaviors, even when the law is established and made known to the person, the punishment will not prevent individuals from engaging in the behavior. Therefore, my research assesses an important criminological theory. How has the decriminalization law in Massachusetts affected marijuana usage patterns among adults, and are the marijuana decriminalization opponents and basic deterrence theorists' arguments substantiated? To gather participants, the snowball sampling technique was used. This technique was employed because marijuana is a legal drug, and the users of illegal drugs are a part of a hidden population in society. Like many drug researchers, my life experience has supplied me with an entrance into the lives of marijuana users. Utilizing this method allows me to establish a rapport with the participants. Since I have contact with these participants, I can reassure any worries or hesitations they may have when conducting the interview. I am able to gain their trust easier, which may allow them to be more honest in their answers. I had 9 key informants who provided, on average, at least 2 other individuals whom I interviewed. Upon contacting those potential participants for my research, I also asked the participant if he or she could recommend another marijuana user who may also be interested in participating. To be included in the study, they had to be 18 years old or older and have used marijuana at least once since 2009. The sample is comprised of both former and current users of marijuana. As you can see from the table, the sample size is 20 participants, with the average age of 28.4 years, with a range from 18 to 60 years. 60% were male, most identify as Caucasian, and all identify as heterosexual. 25% were in college, while 55% highest degree completed was a high school diploma. Most were employed either full-time or part-time, and 15% had no income. Most had never been arrested for a drug-related offense. The participant was given an informed consent prior to the interview describing the purpose of this study, the extent of his or her participation, confidentiality confirmation, permission for digital recording, and that he or she will receive hemp products worth an estimated $15 for his or her participation. The interviews are semi-structured with open-ended responses to achieve in-depth information from the subjects. To analyze the data, I first coded it in the Atlas TI software program. I then employed a constant comparative method in which the data are continually compared with previously collected data on marijuana from the same study. This method of data analysis allows for constructive categories that to capture both commonalities and recurrent patterns across participants. Now I will be discussing my findings with quotes for support. The average onset of use was 15.05 years. All the participants are current users of marijuana. 2 to 6 times a day was the average incidence rate for the majority of the participants. Bowls were the most preferred method, followed by blunts or joints. Marijuana was combined with almost every other drug these users have tried, including alcohol. When interviewing participant Alex about combining marijuana with other drugs, he states, "I pretty much smoke with anything. Smoking is such an easy habit when it comes down to it. It's a lot like cigarettes in most situations. Once you become an avid smoker, it's second nature. I'll smoke before I eat, smoke before I drive, smoke while I drink, and I love to smoke on mushrooms." And when asking him if he thought marijuana influences the other drugs high, he explains, "Yes, of course, like the combination of any two drugs definitely affects the actual high, but the casualness of weed makes it a lot easier to combine with almost anything, especially with uppers. Weed is a pacifying feeling, it soothes you of an experience." The most commonly used other drugs were alcohol, cocaine, mushrooms, and prescription drugs. The majority of these participants drive under the influence of marijuana regularly. Interviewee Christian describes the experience like, "I found myself to be more cautious because I knew I was high, so I was very attentive and my reactions were faster. I was aware of everything." Interviewee Mike also explains this experience. "It's no different. People think it's like drunk driving, but it's not. It's just me, normally relaxed and calmed down. I'm not drowsy, I'm focused, I'm more cautious and aware of the road." Actually, 7 studies substantiated their experiences. They show that drivers with cannabinoids in their blood are not significantly more likely than drug-free drivers to be culpable in road crashes. Marijuana use has remained the same for the majority of the participants since the decriminalization law went into effect. 2 participants indicate a slight increase in their use, but not because of the law. When asking Mike about his change in use since the law was implemented, he explains, "My use is probably the same amount, maybe a little bit more, but not much." I then asked, "Do you think the law affected that?" And he stated, "No, definitely not. I just have more money this year than last." The majority of these participants did not change their use patterns when using in a criminalized state like New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, or Connecticut, and the majority were not fearful or paranoid to use in these states presently. Alex explains, "I don't really think it makes a difference. I mean, if I were intending to do it in the public eye, or making it a mobile type of thing, smoking in a car, yeah, nowadays I'd feel a little more comfortable in Massachusetts, just because I'm unfamiliar with other laws, but it really doesn't change much. Still the same action, still the same experience." Many proponents of marijuana criminalization claim that it is a gateway to harder drugs. Critics of the gateway theory say that individuals predisposed to use harder drugs will likely do so regardless of whether they use marijuana first. Marijuana just happens to be the most available, so it comes first. The proposition that marijuana use causes progression toward other illicit drugs use is difficult to establish. Still, there seems to be a link between marijuana and other illicit drugs. Marijuana was the first used drug for 20% of my participants, including alcohol and tobacco. All the participants had learned about marijuana from either friends or siblings. All the users were with other individuals using marijuana for their first time. All the users stated curiosity and friends instigated their decision to use that first time and use other drugs. Adam sums up his decision to use other drugs by stating, "I was young. Definitely. I say at that kind of age, you start drinking. At a young age, you start smoking. You're almost down to do kind of whatever, you know?" I will now be discussing other findings. All the participants did not notice a change in the potency of the grade they buy. However, the majority of them agreed that higher grades of marijuana was more available now than before, but not because of the law. The majority of them suggested it was because demand was higher for these higher potencies than in previous years. For example, Christian explains the change in potency. "Yeah, I've noticed that, but it's not because of the decriminalization that it's getting better. I just think that it's gone better over the years and the demand for better grades is higher than in the past. I think people are making it better to make more money because that's all people want." The cost of their marijuana has not changed since the decriminalization. All different grades are different prices, but have remained the same price since the law was implemented. 75% of the users were for full legalization of marijuana. For example, Frank states, "I think full legalization, and the reason is I think resources will be better spent elsewhere. And I'm not a drug advocate or anything like that, but I just feel that alcohol is far more dangerous and should be more heavily regulated than it is presently, and more than marijuana." 10% of the users were content with the decriminalization law and were in no rush to see legalization implemented. For example, Alex. "Yeah, the style of law that they approach is the best way to slowly to get it legalized. Necessarily though, I don't think it needs to be legalized for things to change. If you decriminalize it in the sense that Massachusetts has, you have gotten rid of the idea of intense trafficking. And if you minimize the amount of weed people can have, I think it makes it a lot more of a controlled atmosphere and it's less abrasive to the community." 15% of the users wanted medical marijuana laws implemented more than legalization. For example, Lori states, "Having cancer, full legalization of the pill for medical reasons would make my life a lot less stressful, and I would not have to feel like I'm shunned upon for smoking it due to a medical condition." My research has shown that the decriminalization law has had no effect on use patterns. The majority of the participants have not changed their use. Bentham would argue that marijuana use is unfit for punishment. These laws are ineffective because they do not reduce use. These laws do not prevent any harm from marijuana use, and the harms of incarceration are much greater than marijuana use itself. Figures show that drug-related arrests have more than doubled between the years 1990 and 2005, with 82% of the growth was for marijuana and 79% for marijuana possession alone. Marijuana arrests now constitute nearly half, 45%, of all drug arrests annually in the United States. My study also questions deterrence theory because people are not affected by the law from using it or possessing this substance. Even though marijuana is illegal and the users are aware of the illegality of it, they still use it. The gateway theory is very controversial. 90% of the participants had tried harder drugs, and curiosity remained the top reason. But from my findings, I cannot effectively show that marijuana itself led these users to try harder drugs. Furthermore, a few participants had never moved on to harder drugs. As you can see, my study has been an overall success. I've encountered a few problems while conducting my research this summer. Given that the snowball technique is the only method I utilize, it has not been as successful as I previously hoped or as it had been in other studies. All my initial informants have given me names of willing participants who have contacted me back, but the chain has stopped at them. Even though marijuana is decriminalized in Massachusetts, most of the people I've contacted to interview still would not participate for fear of repercussions. Given that the participants I personally knew and contacted myself displayed greater openness during their interview. The interviewees I gathered from informants were more apprehensive, guarded in their interviews. They did not show the same level of comfort or trust. Some of the responses were very vague, using words like good or bad, and they seemed fearful to expand on their responses if asked. When setting up interviews, participants did not want a third party present at the interview. My mentor and I had initially planned on her coming to the first few interviews, but if I mentioned bringing my mentor along, they were more likely to decline because they were not comfortable. This could have limited some of my interview data because I may have not asked them to expand on questions they could have expanded more on. When conducting a study on illicit drug use, participants are already difficult to find, and gift cards are a great incentive for gathering participants, but ATP would not permit gift cards as an incentive. After selecting hemp products, I found it a bit harder to gain participants because some individuals decided they had no use for the products and declined the invitation to participate. If gift cards were being utilized, I think I would have an easier time gathering participants.